Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Co-op. This morning, I have the pleasure of talking to Julian Hill, who's an assistant professor at Georgia State University College of Law. He's a teacher, a lifelong learner, community organizer, artist, and attorney. Good morning, Mr. Hill.
Hey, good morning, Bobby Vernon. Good to be back in conversation with you. How you doing?
Glad to have you back on. I am doing great. Where are you this morning? What part of the world?
I'm here in the South, currently in Decatur, just east of Atlanta.
Decatur, east of Atlanta? East of Atlanta. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so I happen to be in Tucson, Arizona this morning. It's been in 70s and 80s out here during the day.
Must be nice.
Well, somebody had to do it, so I raised my hand. Somebody had to do it.
Thanks for the sacrifice.
Yes. Yes. So tell me a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? Kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm from a pretty small town outside of Chicago, about an hour south of the city called Kankakee. And so spent my first 18 years there, went through the public school system there, was in the quote-unquote gifted program for a chunk of that time. And after graduating from high school in the early 2000s, I went to Northwestern University, just north of the city, where I studied philosophy, and with a focus on Africana and political philosophy.
Okay, so you had to keep on going to school because you teach law. So where'd you go to get your law degree?
Yeah. So I did a detour before I went to law school. So I taught high school Spanish in Southern California for a couple of years with Teach for America. And then after that, I backpacked for several months through a lot of Latin America. I'm basically from Argentina to Mexico. And then when I ran out of money, I came back home. And then I went and did this program called Woofing, Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms, in Uganda, and worked on a farm for about 3 months. And so then I went to law school at Harvard. Most of my focus was on international law because I thought I wanted to do work holding corporations accountable for human rights abuses. But after like my first year, I wanted to be a transactional attorney.
Why?
I think the main thing was I felt like the theory of change that kind of underlied that type of work wasn't in alignment with mine. I mean, you basically potentially in litigation for 5, 10, 15 years to hold a company accountable for, let's say, helping poison local water sources, so on and so forth. And in the meantime, other companies could be doing similar things. It's not really sure what the accountability is going to be on the government side. And so transactional lawyering for me made a little more sense because I had done student organizing. I was really passionate about building institutions. And so I felt like it had more of a nexus to the kind of build work that I was more interested in and that I felt was more necessary.
So you went to Harvard.
Yes.
Oh, you and Michelle and Barack.
Yeah.
They let black folk in there now.
I mean, they did then. I don't know. I can't, the numbers aren't looking too great now from last that I checked. But yeah, when I was there, I want to say somewhere between like 7 and 10% of the class was black. And so they bring in about 500 students a year, or at least they did at that time. So you're talking about, 40, 50 black students per class. And so about 150 or so on campus or, going to class at any particular time. So I felt pretty supported. Like the boss of the Black Law Student Association was a strong source of support in terms of like academics, professional, but even just like socially while I was there for sure.
So they brought in 500 students per year, and it's a 3-year program.
Yep.
So there's 1,500 students. If there's 10%, there's 150 black students there.
Roughly, yep. Okay. I mean, that was the case then. I know this last class, I think they had like below 20 or maybe even lower. So I know there's been a big uproar in light of, some of the shifts around DEI and the way in which it's being demonized and uncritically kind of cast away, as we've seen in all kinds of contexts.
Isn't it interesting that how when planes fall down it's somehow related to black folks in DEI? We get blamed.
When it's cloudy, it's DEI. When it's traffic, it's DEI. So they'll find any reason to blame us. Notwithstanding the fact that obviously so many of these institutions are rooted in not giving folks opportunities, right? That's the whole point of DEI, right? But the logic is about power. It's never about any sort of moral ethic or any sort of assortment of values. It's really, what's going to allow us to maintain a certain level of power today. If the sky's blue and that helps us get in power today, we're going to say it's blue. If saying it's red is going to get us in power, we say it's red the next second. So I think when people look at it from a logic of power, it makes a lot more sense to kind of decipher the shenanigans.
What's your definition of power, Mr. Philosopher?
Wow. That's a great question. I think in these days, I'm thinking about the ability to bring into fruition the things that you want, to self-determine, to basically bring to fruition the things that you desire. And I think some instances it could be at the expense of others, which I think we're seeing now in terms of how power is being wielded. But essentially, folks are able to say, hey, we want to do this. We want to, storm the Treasury Department. We're going to install people to do that, right? That's power. Like you say you want to do something and you can kind of make it happen. And unfortunately, in a lot of contexts, folks who believe in freedom, folks who believe in justice, folks who believe in self-determination for people who are marginalized aren't as organized as we could be, I think, to wield more power.
So it's all about power to get accomplished what you want to get accomplished, what you desire. That's my hot take right now. It might change tomorrow, but that's what comes to mind for me right now. Well, that works for me in terms of my definition of power. I used to not like the word power because to me the people in power was always doing bad things. The people didn't have power. I think that's still true because they want to accomplish something and they don't see how to accomplish it unless you put down somebody.
Yep.
You got to put down somebody, enslave them, or take their corner or whatever that they want so that they can get what they want and take what you have. This year's Black History Month theme is African Americans and labor. So taking our labor has been one of the ways they've gotten accomplished what they want to get accomplished and have power over us through slavery. So now, that word is, and that's why when you used it, the logic is about power. That's what I have come to notice, to believe, to see. You call it racism, you call it sexism, you call it whatever ism you may want to call it, but it's all about how do I have power over you to accomplish what I want at your expense, whatever that expense may look like. Taking your labor or taking your life.
Yeah. I mean, I think the isms are important because it kind of helps us understand who is most centered and when it comes to power and who's most able to wield it and why and who are the others, right? And so I think the way sexism operates, ableism, the sort of nationalism around so us versus the immigrants, so on and so forth, like all that helps us understand, I think, how power is wielded and against whom.
Yes, sir. So you've traveled around a lot through this history. You've gotten tremendous education. You kind of went over quickly. You were in the gifted program, okay, in high school. I was in the slow program. They put me in the slow thing. We integrated schools in 1955, and I could not speak very well, read, couldn't spell at all, kind of thing. So they put me in a dumb class. At least that's what the other students called me.
Look at you now.
Yeah, well, I wanted to prove to them, but mainly to myself. I didn't realize this as I was doing it, but that I was not dumb. Okay. I could do math. It was interesting that CAT words were difficult and harsh and harmful like, but A squared plus B squared equals C squared was fun. I can't explain it today, but I could do those math problems. The more pages it took to solve a problem, the more I liked it, the more steps that were involved. But so far as I knew, and my parents told me, you're far from dumb. And so they put in, you're gifted. You take whatever gift you have and get them to work for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They got some job for us.
You say what?
I said, gifted or not, they got some job for us to do.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
And most of us are gifted if we can find those gifts and figure out how to get education to use those gifts. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're mostly highly gifted. Okay, so you got your law degree, and then where'd you go from there?
After that, I put my soul on lease for a couple years and worked at a large law firm in New York where I was part of a Latin American practice. So I was basically helping state-owned, private-owned Latin American companies engage in all types of different transactions. So, they wanted to get a big loan, so did financing work. One company wanted to purchase another, so mergers and acquisitions. One company wanted to sell bonds or securities to American investors, so I did capital markets work. And paid off my loans and quit promptly. So I spent 3.5 years there, paid off my loans, took a 2-week vacation, quit, and then I shifted into legal services, also in New York City. I didn't mention where I was at, so I was in New York City. And at that point, shifted to doing a lot of work around worker cooperatives, small businesses, nonprofits, supporting organizing at Take Root Justice. And a lot of that was inspired by reading Jessica Gordon-Nimhart's book, Collective Courage, as a part of a group study that I did during my second year at the law firm.
So did you have to organize that group to read that book?
So it was a small group. So it was a good friend of mine who I met during my third year of law school. He was starting law school that year. He just reached out to me and said, hey, there's this book I read. We had already been kind of talking about capitalism, black capitalism, the ways in which our economy is just really raggedy. And so he said, hey, this is a book I think we might be into. And he had a friend who was also in Boston at the time. And so, the three of us read the book, but he was the main organizer. And then once we read it, we actually reached out to Jessica, who's now a mentor and friend of mine. And she answered the email, and we had a phone call with her because we were all doing organizing work at the time and trying to figure out why aren't folks in these organizing spaces, black organizing spaces, talking more about cooperative economics. And so we wanted to pick her brain around that. She was gracious with her time, as most folks who know her already know. She's very gracious with her time and gave us some helpful insights.
She's gracious with her time and knowledge.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, she's has a big name, and I thought it was going to be difficult to reach out to her when we started this program 11 years ago. So maybe she was on 9 years ago and been on the program 5 times, and she's just tremendously gracious, easy to talk to, and she shares her knowledge. That's for sure. I would love to be in a book club studying her book. I found it hard to read. It's more like a textbook to me. Okay, and of course, as I told you, my reading was not that good, and I still have to fight to read stuff. So I use it now as sort of if I have any question about co-ops or black and co-ops, I go look through her book. That's my Bible reference book. Yeah, and it's packed full of knowledge. Okay, so you the three of you all did the book while you were in New York organizing, and where did that take you with that knowledge?
I read that book, and then I immediately did research on folks doing legal work around cooperatives in New York, and then cold emailed Carmen Huertas Noble, who's a director of a community economic development clinic at the law school at CUNY, and said, hey, let me do some pro bono work through my firm, with you and your students. She connected me with one of her students who at the time was working at the organization that's now Take Root Justice. And so all of us got together with my pro bono director. It didn't work out, but that's how I got onto the listserv for the New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives. At that time, the Eastern Conference of Workplace Democracy, I think is what it's called, was held at Fordham. So I went to that. And so it just kind of snowballed. I just kind of started meeting people. I met Omar from Green Worker Cooperatives at the time. I met Clark Arrington, who is now an ancestor, rest in peace, at that conference, Gauri Krishna, so on and so forth. So by the time I sent that cold email to Carmen, within a year, I was working at Take Root Justice. And part of that was, they see me around, always in a suit. Like, who's this dude? But I was, I had always been, my dad was a union organizer. He was president of his union. He worked at a factory that made cooking oil. So labor and exploitation of labor had been an interest of mine since I was a young person. So cooperative economics and Jessica's book really unlocked something for me, just a new language and a history that I just wasn't aware of, that got me thinking about, okay, how can we as Black folks think about our labor differently? And how can we continue that legacy? So, and as a lawyer, I was like, I got these skills, so let me figure out how to support.
Did you take any business classes, economic classes in your JD program or anywhere?
So when I was at Northwestern, I took an economics class because I had to. I did a summer program in D.C. at Georgetown where I took another economics class. At law school, I took corporations, but nothing strictly. I took a class that was on law, and it was kind of more like different, like income statements and just different financial instruments. But yeah, none of them talked about cooperatives at all.
In my MBA, there was no conversation about co-ops. But I find it interesting that most lawyers don't know about businesses or the financial statements, the profit and loss statement, balance sheet, cash flow, those kinds of things. Let alone you talk about economics or economic justice. So on your bio, you talk about a lifelong learner. So you're learning about the economics right now, combining that with your legal?
I'm learning about all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's not. Yeah, I mean, I just read a book on Black disability politics this past week. I start a new book every week. I don't always finish it, but it's a mix of a lot of nonfiction. So, and I'm trying to integrate more fiction. So some of it's around economics, some of it's around history. Trying to think of other stuff that I've read recently, but it kind of runs the gamut. Right, I read something on the music industry recently. I do a lot of work around political prisoners, and so was rereading some of Joy James's book on imprisoned intellectuals, and so yeah, it kind of runs the gamut. And I also read law review articles and stuff like that, since I guess I'm a law professor. And people ask me to kind of read their stuff, because a lot of people graciously read my stuff, but yeah, kind of runs the gamut.
So in your prisons work, have you, and you mentioned Jessica Gordon-Emhard, she's doing research in co-ops in prisons.
Yep.
Have you come across that in your research?
Yeah, so most of the stuff that I know about it is actually through the work that Jessica's already done and kind of some of the stuff that she's written, but also just in conversation with her. I actually, funny thing, I teach a seminar at Georgia State on solidarity economy lawyering, and they have to do a final paper. And one of my students is actually interested in writing about worker cooperatives in prisons. And they were like, most of the research they have done preliminarily has been through the writings of Jessica. And so once she finishes that paper, I'll have even more knowledge. But it's come up a little bit in those different contexts.
Well, let's see if we can't get her on the show to talk about that, what she found out. I got introduced to it with a bakery in Italy. The co-op was in the prison and outside the prison. And so their recidivism rate was around 3%. And what is it here in the U.S.? 70% people go back into prisons after they're let go.
Well, it's by design. So
yeah. But it makes all the sense in the world. If you have
too much sense
job when you get out, you got these bakery skills, and you learn how to make decisions together in the co-op space, and you learn how to share the bounty, whatever you make. You learn how to share it. When you get out, you have a family, you have a business, you have a say, you have a voice. Who wants to go back to an environment where you don't have this stuff? And there's no need to do the things that you used to do, whether it was selling drugs or stealing cars or whatever. You don't need that anymore because you're making the money to survive, and you've learned a lot about how to do that. It just makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. Assuming you live in a country that, actually kind of cares about you and your kind and doesn't want to, again, going back to the question about power. I mean, I know the New African Independence Movement, there are people who have varying opinions around it, but one of the interesting, I think, offerings from that is this concept of New Africans, and the fact that Black people here who come from all sorts of parts of Western Africa and so on and so forth, are they really citizens here, right? How has the state really ever treated the folks here who look like us as citizens? And so I think the ways in which we're treated in the context of like prisons, and the ways in which our labor is exploited in prisons, the ways in which schools kind of put us off into certain kind of categories, gifted, so on and so forth. A lot of that stuff isn't about care. It's about how do we, I think, maintain certain institutions that allow us to wield power over groups of people who are marginalized. So I think, again, like, it makes sense to people who are like using like reason that's around improvement, right? Benefits for everyone. But when people are moving in a way that's like, no, me, my, then it's like, okay, I can understand why you want most of these folks to go back into prison, where you have whole towns that have, over 50% of their economy rooted in a local prison, right? And so it's pretty peculiar for people who care about others, right?
Well, unfortunately, you're telling the God honest truth, and it's amazing that I need somebody like you to always bring me back to that space. There's some people just don't want it, so that somebody will not go back to prison, that they'll have a life outside, they'll be productive citizens. They don't want that. They want the labor of the prisoners to do whatever they want done.
We can't be sending ships over to Mars, and we don't know how to find ways to make systems that are productive for people to be able to live productive lives. If that's something we wanted, we would, right? Like Italy, there are all kinds of examples all around the world of ways of being that aren't rooted in the same types of exploitation of labor. I think as Black people, there's a tendency to want to romanticize the possibility, this sort of arc of justice kind of moving linearly. And it's like, well, we're back to Trump, right? So what does that mean? So
before we talk about Trump, to whatever extent we're going to talk about him and where he wants to take us back to, you mentioned earlier that you're working with young people. What are you doing with young people?
Yeah, so a few different things. One of the issues I found in my legal practice with helping folks form worker cooperatives legally is the need for political education. Oftentimes we're working with developers who are helping to provide some of that, but it's mostly adults. And so over the past year, probably 2 years, I've been working with a couple initiatives that are really trying to provide education on the solidarity economy, cooperative economics to young people. And so I started this might have been 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, when I was involved with Black Youth Project 100 in New York. And so I'd done sort of workshops on cooperative economics at the local chapter level, at the national level. More recently, I've been working with Gangsters the Growers.
Gangsters are what?
Gangsters the Growers. It's a program that's being run by the Come Up Project here in Atlanta, where they're mostly providing education and other sorts of support for mostly formerly incarcerated young Black youth to get them the knowledge and the skills to be able to run their own worker cooperatives. And so I've been kind of helping out with them with some of that programming. And then there's also a program for young people, New African Scouts, that I've collaborated with, where I'm using things like jumping jack competitions and scenarios where they're record label owners to help them think through some of the core concepts of cooperative economics. And so, it's a thing I think is important to be having in conversation with young people, as we've talked about. You can go K through 12, K through 12 plus, and not learn anything about it. So that's kind of what I've been working on, and we'll continue to work on for the coming weeks, months, and years.
Well, I may want to come and take some classes at record label owners and how you can do that cooperatively. I've been interested in too. We're going to take our first break, and when we come back, talk a little bit more about the kinds of things you're doing now, but I really want to talk about the future. As we've mentioned labor, but more as it relates to labor, how we own our own labor. And you mentioned through worker co-ops. We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks. The program is Everything Co-op, and we're talking to Julian Hill, who is an assistant professor of law at Georgia State University in Atlanta. Julian, we've been on air a little over 11 years. National Co-op Bank has been our main financial sponsor throughout these years. NCB's mission is to support and be an advocate for America's cooperatives and their members, especially in low-income communities, by providing innovative financial and related services. So, Julian, in the work that you have done, have you had an opportunity to work with NCB in any capacity?
Not formally. I think that when I was doing a workshop over at the Connect Cooperative, which is here in Atlanta, I believe they might have had a representative who was there. I'm blanking on the gentleman's name, but the workshop was around just different financing models. And so I believe they had someone from there, and then someone from, I think, maybe Invest Atlanta or something to that effect. But that's been the extent of my interaction with them, in any way.
Well, I have found over the years they do look for innovative ways of financing things. When you talk about low-income communities, they have to, because normal bankers are looking for how much collateral do you have, what assets do you already have, so that banks they're interested in two things: making money off of their investment and getting their investment back. Mm-hmm. And the way they assure they get their investment back is by pledging whatever assets you currently have. Where if you're in a low-income community, or you haven't been allowed to gather assets by redlining and other forms of discrimination, then it's hard to get a bank loan. So NCB or Shared Capital or other organizations have to look for other innovative ways of making a loan because the assets aren't there. Also, with a co-op, there's not one person or a group of people, but it's not a board of directors or a partnership where you can go and ask the individual for their assets. Too often, we don't have the assets, but also in a co-op, it's owned by the group. So it makes it harder to get funding and financing. If you're in that world, you need space, you want to take a look at them.
Awesome.
I'd like this working with children, with young adults. Tell me a little bit more about Gangsters to Growers. You mentioned that organization, and I know the name. I just know it by name because I like the name.
Okay. Yeah, it is a dope
Gangsters
name,
to
right?
Growers.
Yeah. So, comrade of mine, Abidou Henderson, started the organization. I want to say at least 5 years ago, for sure. And I believe they've had at least 4 or 5 classes so far, and it's taken a couple of different forms But the most recent iteration, it's like I think it's 10-month program where you've got a group of young people who come in, they do yoga, they do cooperative economics, they do cooking, they do agriculture stuff, they do canvassing. And the idea is to kind of treat them as whole people, right? You talk about the idea around recidivism. You know, these are folks, many of whom are system impacted, but there's a lot of investment the program makes into the folks. There's staff who kind of supports them. So they have 2 co-ops that they've created. One is Sweet Soul, which sells hot sauce. And then the other one is Kwanzaa, which does a lot of support with folks in the agriculture realm. So helping people set up gardens, landscaping, I believe, stuff like that. And so I've had the pleasure of, just seeing them move out and about here in these Atlanta streets. But yeah, it's an awesome program, and, you know, one that I try to support in whatever way I can. So shout out to them for doing the work.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And a place I'd like to be in is also work with young people, giving them other ideas and other options of what they can do with their labor.
Mm-hmm.
So just real quickly, a definition of a worker co-op. We've used that term. A worker co-op is a co-op that's owned and controlled by the employees. So the employees own the business. They control the business. They have the say. They own the whatever factory they may have, whatever they produce, they own, and the profit they own. So that's a worker co-op. And then we haven't talked about consumer co-ops so much, but consumer co-ops are housing co-ops, credit unions, rural electric co-ops. It's owned by and controlled by the people that buy the products or services, are consumer co-ops. 2 other types that farmers use and artists are beginning to use, it's either purchasing co-op or marketing co-op. Form a company that purchases what they need. The farmers may form a company that purchases whatever equipment they need, or fertilizer, whatever they're using to produce whatever they produce. And a marketing co-op is on the other end of that production. They market whatever the farmers use. Well, Ace Hardware is a purchasing co-op. All of those individual hardware stores belong to Ace. It's a co-op, and they buy their goods. They can buy outside of Ace, but they buy a lot of their products through Ace, and they get a better product with a lower price by buying it in bulk. So those are the 4 types. We've mainly talked about worker co-ops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great place where people can own their own labor. They get to say what they do with their labor, and they get the rewards of their labor. Whatever profits, they get to say of how they use that profit. Yes.
Trying to come teach my class?
Yeah. I teach at least one part of it. And I grew up in the housing co-op space. That's where I learned about co-ops. And I have been at a couple classes where I teach that section of the class. And I don't mind coming to Atlanta. I like Atlanta.
Yeah, pull up. I lived in a housing co-op, a couple housing co-ops when I lived in New York, but I was renting. They was having us bring down their maintenance fees, but it was a cool experience nonetheless.
Yeah, that's one way that co-ops, they will buy back the units and then rent them out, and you can get normally a higher rent price than you can for the co-op fee. And also some of the members will rent out their units and make whatever that gap is between the rental and what they have to pay. So I'm back to anything else you're doing with young people to help them to get to know about co-ops.
Do law school students count as young people?
Yes. Well, mostly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, right now at Georgia State, I would say there are 2 things that probably fall in that bucket. One is I teach a seminar, a standalone seminar on solidarity economy lawyering. And so in that class, I teach students about some of the underlying theories and values and the history around the solidarity economy. We talk about a bunch of domestic examples like what you got in Jackson, Mississippi. We talk about some international examples, so Emilia Romagna, Mondragon, stuff in Africa, parts of East Asia. And then we talk about the legal issues that you have to deal with in advising, let's say, worker cooperatives, community land trusts, stuff like that. And then we talk about the different hats that you can wear, whether it's community education, supporting with advocacy, or policy. And so I've been teaching that for about 3 years. And then secondly, I teach a clinic, a community economic development clinic that we just started in the fall, where we provide free legal services for small businesses and nonprofits. And we've had definitely a few institutions in the solidarity economy, worker cooperatives included, who've been clients.
Okay, you've used the word solidarity economy a couple times. What is that? What is solidarity economy?
Yeah, so I would say it's sort of the latest iteration of a way of organizing economies that's rooted in people and being regenerative with respect to the planet, as opposed to centering profits. And so I think the latest iteration is kind of a product of some of the fights against neoliberalism that happened in Latin America, but also you saw some of it in parts of Europe back in the late 80s and 90s. And it's really a framework, but also a movement that's rooted in how do we build institutions that are not about just centering profits. So you kind of have, the way I talk to my students around it is, you probably have a solidarity economy alternative to most things, where you're talking about production, whether you're talking about exchange, whether you're talking about what do we do with the surplus, whether you're talking about land itself and how we steward land. And so I teach the students about that whole framework, movement, and then with the role that lawyers can play in proliferating it.
Okay. Do you find that students like this conversation? Do you have people that are trying to get into your class once they learn about it?
Yeah, so it's a self-selected, course they pick to be in it. And so at its height, I've had 18 students, which I cap it at. And they do like final papers, they do final presentations, and those presentations they really enjoy because we do them in community. So the Connect Cooperative, which I mentioned before, is a third space in West Atlanta. It has hosted us before, so it's open to community. I would say usually I got 1 or 2 skeptics in the class, which we usually convert by the end of the class.
Okay.
But for the most part, the students are really interested and curious about it, right? They might not know about it, but something about it resonates with them, and the class is really an opportunity for them to dig deeper and get their understanding, but also debate and talk about the critiques and the limitations.
Okay. That sounds like a class I would like to be in, but I don't know the law part.
It's all good. You're welcome to come through, hang out with us. The first unit, we talk about kind of the history and the values, and in the second part, we talk about some of the legal stuff.
So what do you see, particularly in the context of African Americans and labor, where they have taken our labor and put us in slavery where they didn't have to pay for it, or pay as little as possible, put us in shacks, gave us crumbs off the tables, didn't give us health care, and they still don't want to do that, wouldn't educate us, they don't want us to be knowledgeable. So they took our labor and gave us back as little as possible. So in this framework of the ways that they've taken our labor, where do you see us going now, particularly with this administration, and that 70-some million people voted for him, which I just find phenomenal, and I can't believe it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll see, man. He's talking about computers being computed and things. We'll see what they say about this election in the future. But all that being said,
well, let me just go back to that, because I can't believe that 70 million plus people voted for him. So has always been who may have manipulated with the computers. But sounds like what you may have been saying too. But that's where I believe.
I don't know.
Keep moving.
What I will say to the question is, I think the way our system operates, it really is about making us see ourselves primarily, I think, as workers and or consumers. And so what I think has been on my mind lately has been, how do we find ways to lower the need to sell our labor in the market, right? So part of it is, as we mentioned before, worker cooperatives. But even before that, one of the things that's necessary as a prerequisite is sort of a mind shift, right? So the education piece comes up and continue to do that. I think that's very important. But also, how do we lower our costs, right? And lean into other parts of the solidarity economy. And so, how do we think about our lifestyles and the things that we purchase? And like, how do we think about housing, right? Does everyone have their single family home and the white picket fence? Is that kind of sustainable? I've been thinking about the identity I have as just a community member and trying to center that in ways that can allow for me to build the types of relationships that can lower my costs and lower my need to work in the market, right? So I've been doing a neighbor challenge where I'm trying to meet a new neighbor every week with the hopes of eventually, building some relationships and maybe starting something like a time bank or something where, folks can exchange their labor for time and, just like resources and stuff like that. Because as we saw through the pandemic, it was these types of relationships that got us through the worst parts of that crisis, where you talk about mutual aid, so on and so forth. And I worry what the next 3+ years is going to bring in terms of potential other catastrophes that are going to require us to lean outside of just being workers. And so, but using those skills, right, that we have to be able to be more in service as parts of communities that are building up some resilience, because when whatever future crisis comes, like, that's what we're going to have to lean back on. So I don't know if that was a coherent answer, but those are the things that
I want to go and pick out some of them. You mentioned lowering our costs, looking at our lifestyles, deciding what kind of transportation will we use. And if we decide we want to own a vehicle, what kind of vehicle do you want to own? And then housing choices. Do you want a single family house? In D.C., I lived in several places, couple times in Prince George's County, which supposedly like one of the highest ranking counties for black wealth. And you could buy $500,000, $1 million homes in these areas. And I chose, after my wife passed in 2007, to move into a co-op, housing co-op. Well, the cost of the maintenance cost, what it takes for me to pay, you normally in a co-op, you have to buy it, and you may have to go get a mortgage. It's called a share loan. But once that paid off, what you have is what is like the condo fee or the co-op fee.
Yep.
And that co-op fee in this 1-bedroom, 700 square foot apartment, which is what all I needed. Matter of fact, it's a little bit too big. That's all I needed as a single person. It was like $400 a month after the mortgage piece was paid off.
Yep.
And that $400 is less than what the utilities cost in the house that I had. Utilities cost more than what you got to rent all of this. I mean, you got to heat all of this space or cool all of this space and cut the lawns and all. Oh, no. Okay.
That part.
Okay. So I chose a lifestyle where I'm a block away from the metro, have off-street parking, gated community, and I'm paying $400 a month after I paid off that stuff in D.C. Okay? You just don't hear things like that. You just don't.
Living the life, my friend, living the life. Well, I mean, but for some people that it's like, why would you do that? But I think you raise an important point around, like, what do you need? I know when I was living in New York and I was bringing home several $1,000s at the firm. My first year, I lived in a spot where I had 3 roommates. Then I moved to a 5th floor walk-up studio in Harlem. I mean, not because that's all I could afford, but because, I wanted to kind of keep my costs down. It was only through that and other decisions, and obviously a lot of privilege. Like, I didn't have kids, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have family who was relying on me to kind of provide them with support, which some people do, right? And I think that's real. But in light of that, it was only through those choices where I was able to pay off my loans. I had like $150,000 some dollars in loans when I left law school, right? And it was only through some of those choices I was able to pay it off in 3.5 years. and free up my labor, right? Like I was working lots of hours. I told my parents I was quitting. I was like, yeah, I'm making $290. I'm gonna be making 65. And they're like, what are you talking about? This is
You crazy boy?
right. But yeah, just the mental toll that it was taking on me, physical, so on and so forth. And it's just the ability to do work that's more in alignment, but also to have more control over my labor, right? Which is ultimately what we're talking about, required me to make some different decisions that even people who had the type of privilege that I had, right? Single, no family, needs, none of that, don't often make, right? And so that's an important piece to it, the cost and lifestyle part.
Make sure I understand you, because it sounds crazy that you said that you were making $250,000 a year, and then you took
$290 with my bonus, $290, $300, something like that.
So you're making $290K a year, and you take a job at $65K.
65, 67, something like that. Yeah.
Under 70.
Under 70, absolutely. I was trying to get to the 70, but it just.
So you took a 75% cut.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, you were making 25% of what you were making before.
Roughly, yeah.
So are you crazy, Julian Hill?
I mean, it depends on who you ask. Depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, I don't think I'm crazy. I think I have a strong sense of my moral compass and a strong sense of values in terms of how I want to use my skills, the gifts that I've been given, the resources I've been afforded in ways that are gonna, mitigate suffering, increase belonging, and be a benefit to other people. And I felt like the work that I was doing, was helping support some systemic issues that, on the one hand, were impacting people who look like me or people who had similar profiles or of my cousins or of, my family members, and I couldn't justify it. So maybe, if I was doing some other work, it'd be different, but no, I think that, my mental health was great. I was doing important work, and I wouldn't be here if I kept doing that work, kept making that money. So that's my reflections on it, but I'm sure other people might have other opinions.
So this is the second time we've had a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you're highly intelligent. That's not stupid or crazy. And you've made choices. And you made choices that's best for you and the society. Okay. I like you said your moral compass is strong. Okay. You're clear. You can make choices that fit your moral compass, not the organization you were in, whatever they wanted you to do, and they were paying you $300K, and then they feel like they can tell you what to do, and you had to
Absolutely. Absolutely. Going home at 11 o'clock at night, that was a light day. That was like, oh, we can, this is we living a life, right? And so, yeah, I mean, just not a lot of control over my time. And so there are ways in which people want to look at the money you're bringing in, but it's hard to quantify the sacrifices, right? It's hard to quantify the depression. It's hard to quantify not taking care of your body and your body doing weird things, right? It's hard to quantify and really balance it out and say, okay, is this worth the 300K? And I have a strong moral compass, but like I said before, nothing's linear. I still have things that people can critique me around, and definitely not perfect, but I think at some of those major sort of transition points, I'm pretty proud of the decisions that I made and how they align with who I want to be in the world and what I want my legacy to be, what I want people to remember me for whenever I transition from this plane.
Fantastic. Well, do you have a family now? Or are you?
Barbara Vernon, I'm working on it.
Okay.
Not quite, but definitely something I'm hoping to have at some point, for sure. But here in Atlanta, or Decatur more specifically, just hanging out.
Okay. You mentioned stress. Well, you mentioned depression. Normally that comes from stress. Coming home at 11 o'clock at night, being back in the office at 8 or 9. What do you do to protect your body?
I love this question. Well, I meditate every morning. I do breath work every morning. I have like a little morning routine. I try to work out, mostly calisthenics, for a little bit every morning. I have a therapist who I see periodically.
Wait a minute. You're telling me you're a black man and you go to a therapist?
Yeah. Yeah, man, big fan. Big fan. Like, yeah, I mean, has helped me kind of see some connections to childhood stuff that I didn't realize was coming up. Helped me navigate different conflicts, hard relationship decisions, romantic and otherwise. So yeah, I mean, I could just speak from my experience. It's been extremely helpful. But also having boundaries around work, right? So trying to have a cutoff time, which I'm struggling with. I'm definitely struggling with that. Vitamins, eating throughout the day, stuff like that, hydrating. And so all those things. I journal as well. Journaling has been something I've done since I was 12 off and on. So that's a key part of my self-care practice as well. It's something I try to encourage people I'm in relationship with to think about.
I've been thinking about it. I haven't gotten to it. I hear all of the benefits of it, and I think I would start journaling. But what I have learned is on my calendar, I put in when I'm going to do exercise, and then I try to fit my rest of my calendar around that. I found that way I get it done as opposed to doing all of the other stuff, and then somehow I don't get the exercise in. But meditating every morning, I don't have a set time, but I do meditate. Now, in the last minute, what message would you like to leave people with?
I think in order for us to own our own labor, we have to make some important changes in how we see ourselves and how we see the world. I think part of that is seeing ourselves as members of community, and capitalism likes to isolate us and have us thinking that we do everything by ourselves. And I think if we kind of lean more into kind of learning who our neighbors are, building those relationships, building ways to kind of share, I think that's a great onward path toward, thinking about worker cooperative and co-ownership. That's my hot take.
That's a good take. Share. Yeah. Live in your community. Okay. We're not here all by ourselves. Listen, everybody, I ask you to live cooperatively, which is what Brother Julian Hill has just talked about. And we will see you next Thursday.
The preceding program was paid for by Everything Co-op.